Australia does not look empty on a map. On a map, it looks complete, claimed, connected, civilized. A modern country wrapped in cities, highways, borders, and familiar names. But that is the first illusion. Because if you leave the thin, livable edge of Australia and start moving inward, the country does not suddenly become wild. It begins to erase itself. Not all at once. That is what makes it unsettling. The suburbs do not end with a hard line. The farms do not vanish in a single frame. The country pulls away from you gradually, almost politely. Fewer houses, longer gaps between signs, less shade, less water, less evidence that human beings were ever meant to stay here for long. And somewhere in that slow subtraction, a strange question begins to form. What exactly is hidden in all this empty land? Not hidden the way people imagine, not bunkers, not some forbidden vault in the desert. Something more obvious than that, and in its own way, more disturbing. The truth most people never really see is that Australia is not lived in the way it appears to be lived in. The famous version of the country, the beaches, the harbors, the towers, the bright coastal suburbs, is real. But it is also misleading. Because that version sits on the rim. A thin, human arrangement hugging a continent that, just beyond it, becomes something far less negotiable. Drive away from the edge, and the performance changes. The air dries out first. Then the color drains. Green gives way to pale scrub. Pale scrub gives way to ochre, stone, and distances so large they stop feeling like scenery and start feeling like force. The road stretches forward in one unbroken decision, and the land on either side no longer looks like countryside. It looks withheld. You notice it in the spacing. A petrol station appears, then another one much later than expected. A settlement flashes by, but it is barely a settlement at all. Just a low building, a few tanks, a patch of dust that someone once insisted was permanent. The farther you go, the more the word town starts to feel generous. And yet, the unsettling part is not the emptiness itself. It is that the emptiness feels selective, as if the continent has made a distinction between what it allows on the edges and what it refuses at the center. That is why Australia's interior does not feel like a blank space. Blank spaces are passive. This place is not. It presses back. At first, the road still gives you confidence. Asphalt has a way of lying to people. It suggests control. It tells you that because there is a line cutting through the landscape has been solved. But roads in the outback do not always mean conquest. Sometimes they mean the opposite. Sometimes they are proof of how much effort it takes to force a path through a place that never wanted one. And the deeper you go, the more every human object begins to look less like ownership and more like survival equipment. A water tank is no longer ordinary. A power line is no longer background detail. A road sign is no longer just information. Each one starts to feel like evidence, small metallic declarations against the scale. That change matters because it transforms the landscape from scenery into conflict. From a distance, the Australian interior can look simple, flat, repetitive, empty in the boring sense. From inside it, the opposite happens. The sameness becomes pressure. The horizon becomes psychological. The silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling watchful. And if the emptiness were purely natural, there would be nothing else to say. But there is. Because the first real sign that Australia's interior is not merely empty comes when you find proof that it was supposed to be full. Not in theory, in stone, in iron, in walls still standing where the people are gone. Once you drive far enough into the outback, the mystery changes again. The land stops feeling untouched and starts feeling abandoned. That is a very different kind of silence. Untouched land carries distance. Abandoned land carries memory. You see it first in fragments. A collapsed roofline, a platform with no passengers, a line of posts running toward nowhere, a settlement name on a sign that sounds too deliberate for a place that now looks barely real. Suddenly, the interior is no longer just hostile. It is haunted by failed confidence. That matters because it destroys the easiest explanation. If the center of Australia were empty simply because nobody wanted it, this story would be straightforward. But people did want it. They surveyed it, named it, divided it into blocks, ran rail through it, built pubs, schools, stations, and churches, and assumed permanence was only a matter of effort. In places like Farina, that ambition was once concrete. For a time, towns like this were treated as proof that inland settlement could hold. There were homes, hotels, rail connections, trade, livestock, and the old certainty that enough infrastructure could turn distance into opportunity. Now the logic remains more clearly than the life. Ruins have a cruel honesty. They preserve what people expected. Streets laid out for continuity. Buildings made with weight, not improvisation. Public structures placed as if they belonged to a future population, not a vanished one. And that is where a strange inversion takes hold. The stronger the ruins look, the weaker the human claim begins to feel. Because solid walls in an empty place are not only evidence of presence, they are evidence of defeat. They mean people were certain enough to build properly and still failed to stay. Out here, abandonment feels larger than economics, larger than a railway moving elsewhere or an industry slowing down. It feels elemental, as if the settlement was not destroyed by one event, but worn down by a permanent imbalance between human plans and environmental terms. And the environment does not need drama to win. It does not need a single disaster. Sometimes all it needs is less rain than expected, a little more heat, a little more distance, a little more dependence on wells, transport, and hope than a settlement can afford for very long. That kind of defeat is slow, and in some ways, more frightening. Because slow failure gives people time to keep believing, to repair one season, to wait through another, to tell themselves next year will be better, to keep building after the warning signs have already appeared. That may be the deepest tragedy written into these inland ruins. They were not abandoned the moment the dream broke. They often endured past the point where the land had already begun issuing its verdict. A family still unpacking furniture, a publican still serving travelers, a station owner still ordering supplies, a school still opening its door in the morning, all while the balance turns quietly against them. Less water, more uncertainty, longer distances between survival and collapse. That is why the remains scattered across the interior matter so much. They prove the land was not ignored, it was tested. And once you understand that, even small details grow heavier. A stone foundation no longer looks picturesque, it looks expensive. A rusted tank no longer looks nostalgic, it looks necessary. An empty rail line no longer feels romantic. It feels like the remnant of a system that had to work perfectly in a place designed to punish failure. But ruins only tell you that people failed. They do not yet tell you what they were up against. For that, you have to go farther, far enough to feel the land acting not as backdrop, but as pressure. That shift begins in the body. The door opens and the heat does not greet you like weather. It hits you like instruction. Move less. Expose less. Stay only as long as necessary. From a distance, Central Australia looks like open space. But openness is not the same as hospitality. Much of the interior sits in dry climate zones, and the red center is mainly classified as desert. The edge and the center belong to the same country, but not to the same terms of life. Bureau of Meteorology. Out here, that difference is physical. Shade becomes an asset. Water becomes planning. Distance becomes threat. A mechanical problem becomes a scenario. The land does not need to attack dramatically. It only needs you to remain vulnerable for longer than your systems can tolerate. That is what makes it feel hostile. Not because it is loud, because it is patient. There is a kind of violence in environments that do not rush. A storm announces itself. A cliff edge is obvious. A wildfire roars. The outback often does none of that. It waits. It lets the road keep unspooling, lets the engine hum, lets the horizon sit there in complete confidence. And the longer it stays unchanged, the more your mind begins to understand that human comfort here is not normal. It is imported, maintained, temporary. Even silence behaves differently in a place like this. In ordinary life, silence feels like the absence of interruption. Here, it can feel like the absence of protection. No traffic, no voices, no running water, no nearby movement. Just wind over stone and a stillness so complete it begins to feel almost structural, as if the landscape itself has built a chamber around you and sealed it. Then, just when the emptiness begins to feel total, something moves. Not human movement, camel movement. Huge shapes rising out of heat haze, crossing near the roadside with the indifference of true inhabitants. Camels were introduced to Australia in the 19th century, and feral camels are now treated as a major invasive species problem because of their impacts across the rangelands. The irony is sharp. In a land where so much human permanence thins out, introduced animals can keep going. They adapt. They spread. They become part of the visual grammar of emptiness. That is humiliating in a quiet way. It suggests the interior is not empty because life cannot exist there. It is empty because the kinds of life humans prefer to build stable civilization around do not thrive easily on these terms. And once you realize that, every surviving form of human life begins to look less like settlement and more like negotiation. Nowhere does that become clearer than in Coober Pedy. From a distance, it barely resembles a town. It looks excavated, hollowed, and strangely unfinished. And that is exactly why it matters. Coober Pedy does not pretend the environment can be comfortably ignored. It accepts the terms. Around half of its population is estimated to live underground, where temperatures remain far more stable than on the surface. Think about what that means. On most of Earth, building upward is a symbol of confidence. Here, survival chooses burial. The architecture of endurance is not expansion. It is retreat from the surface. That makes Coober Pedy more than an oddity. It is a confession. A whole town quietly admitting that the conditions above ground are too punishing to live with in the ordinary way. By this point, the old idea of empty land has already started to break apart. Empty sounds passive. This place is not passive. It edits. It removes what cannot cope. It reduces what overreaches. It keeps what adapts, but only just enough. And when people realized the interior would not yield easily, they responded the way humans often do when nature resists them. They started building lines across it, fences, barriers, control systems. Not symbols of ease, symbols of desperation. Because by the time humans were stretching wire across huge sections of the continent, the argument had already changed. This was no longer just about settling land. It had become a struggle to contain consequences. Many of them consequences people had introduced themselves. That is the first uncomfortable truth.
A great deal of the outback's instability did not remain purely natural. It became entangled with imported animals, imported systems, and the belief that a continent this large could be disciplined by boundaries and constant maintenance. Feral animals are officially recognized in Australia as a major environmental threat because they prey on native species, compete for food and shelter, destroy habitat, spread disease, and contribute to erosion. That is what makes the fences so revealing. In easier landscapes, a fence is just a boundary. Out here, it starts to look psychological. It runs so far, through such emptiness, with such determination, that it stops feeling like rural infrastructure and starts feeling like a symptom of a deeper insecurity. You can feel that most clearly in the dingo fence. More than 5,600 kilometers long, it was built to protect livestock by keeping dingoes out of sheep country in the more fertile southeast. A barrier of that scale is not a mark of effortless order. It is an admission that the environment could not be used in the desired way without being divided first. And even then, the line does not read like victory. It reads like siege. Because a wire barrier running for thousands of kilometers through near-empty land is not normal infrastructure. It is a sign of panic made permanent. The deeper irony is that these systems were often built not only to hold nature back, but to manage the chaos unleashed by human intervention in the first place. Rabbits are one of the clearest examples. Governments built long barrier fences in desperate attempts to slow their spread after introduced rabbit populations began destroying crops, degrading pasture, displacing native species, and leaving bare ground vulnerable to erosion. Even official historical accounts describe these responses as inadequate against the scale of the problem. State Library of Western Australia. That pattern keeps repeating. Humans introduce a species, alter a balance, or force a pastoral system onto a harsh environment. Then the response becomes bigger and more extreme. More wire, more killing, more maintenance, more separation. And each new measure, rather than restoring confidence, reveals how fragile the original confidence really was. The dingo fence is the clearest symbol of that contradiction because it does more than protect sheep. It shows what happens when human economic logic collides with ecological reality. Reporting on the fence describes major differences on either side. Dingo country stays greener for longer after rain, supports more biodiversity and more small native mammals, while inside the fence there are many more kangaroos, more woody shrubs, and larger numbers of feral cats and foxes. The absence of the apex predator did not create simple order. It created a new imbalance. ABC News. That is the tragic part. The barriers were meant to simplify the environment. Instead, they exposed how complicated it really was. Remove one pressure and another expands. Suppress one species and another overruns the system. Protect one industry and the wider landscape begins to change in ways that ripple far beyond the fence itself. So the outback no longer looks like a place where civilization simply never arrived. It looks like a place where civilization arrived, made demands, imported problems, fought consequences, and then had to keep building defensive systems just to hold a fragile version of order together. And once you see that, the silence of inland Australia changes again. It no longer feels like the silence of neglect. It feels like the silence left behind after enormous effort. After surveys, after rail, after settlements, after failures, after fences, after the realization that even massive systems of control could not turn the center into something easy. By the end of that journey, the mystery no longer looks like a mystery. Not because the interior has become easier to explain, but because it has become harder to misunderstand. Australia's empty center is not a forgotten space. It is a revealed space. A place where the usual human promises begin to thin out. First, the promise of comfort, then the promise of control, and finally, the promise that every piece of land can be made to support the same kind of life. That is the truth hidden in plain sight. Not that something secret was buried out here, but that the map most people carry in their heads is incomplete. They imagine Australia through its coastlines, its cities, its bright edge of habitability. And from there, the interior looks like unused potential, a blank middle, a place waiting for more roads, more towns, more certainty. But the center of the continent is not waiting. It has already answered. You can hear that answer in abandoned towns, in roads that feel less like expansion than endurance, in settlements where life survives by going underground, in fences so long they resemble anxiety made visible, in ecosystems that had to be bent, divided, and constantly managed just to hold a temporary balance together. All of it points to the same conclusion. The emptiness is not an absence of history. It is the result of history. People came here, they planned here, they built here, they fought here, and the land kept deciding how far those ambitions would go. That is why the Australian interior feels different from other vast places. It is not simply remote, it is corrective. It forces every human plan into negotiation with heat, water, distance, and ecological consequence. It strips away the fantasy that scale alone invites settlement. Sometimes scale does the opposite. Sometimes it makes human presence look temporary the moment it leaves the edge. For all the technology, all the infrastructure, all the systems designed to hold the inland in place, the final shape of Australia still reflects an older authority than policy or design. Nearly 9 out of 10 Australians lived within 50 kilometers of the coast by 2019, while much of the red centre remains desert country, not because nobody noticed the interior, but because the interior kept imposing terms the coast never had to. State of the Environment, Bureau of Meteorology. So what is Australia's government hiding in 95% of its empty land? Nothing in the dramatic sense. No final forbidden chamber. No single secret. The real secret is quieter than that. It is that modern nations still have limits. That some landscapes do not surrender just because they are mapped. That emptiness in the middle of a rich and developed country can still be the most honest thing on the map. And once you understand that, the interior stops looking empty. It starts looking final. Not lifeless, not meaningless, just beyond negotiation. A vast interior where nature did not lose the argument, and perhaps never intended to.